Sorry, my computer is lagging a bit. Okay. So I've started out at our website, kansasregents.org. One way to get to the AESIS login is to go to our homepage. If you hover over data and then go down to about data research and planning, then over to data collections and click there. That will take you to an information page about the K-Board data collections. Up in the top right here is login. If you click that, you'll get this message. Talks about pop-up windows. If you have pop-ups turned on, you will need to turn them off for our website. Click OK, and you will click through to the login page. I think the easiest way to get to the login is not to go to our homepage and do what we just did, but to bookmark submission.kansasregents.org. Make sure that when you do bookmark it, you just bookmark that. You might be able to see on the screen this login.jsp. I'll show you something in a minute with the link. We have several data collections that use the same login. And if you accidentally save the wrong link, it will take you to the wrong collection, or you might get an error. So the easiest way to avoid that is to just bookmark this https://submission.kansasregents.org. If you don't have an AESIS account, what you will need to do is click Apply for a new account. There's then this user agreement that all of you will read in detail. It also includes the password requirements, which are not listed on the password page, so it's good to take note of those now. You would click Agree. Then you would choose a user ID. Choose your password. It'll have to be longer than that. Oh, they do have the requirements there now. And then you'll put in your name, your title, your email address, and your phone number. You will then select a project. We'll need to have that changed. But the ABE Pablo project is for AESIS. We changed the name this past year. So you'll select that, and then you'll give it a moment, and it will ask you to select an institution or school. From this list, you will choose your program. Depending on what program you're with, you'll need to pay careful attention. Some institutions have multiple instances, like Butler Community College has Butler Community College, then it has Butler Community College 2 entities. During our last grant cycle, they partnered with another provider, and because of FERPA issues and data tracking, we created a new institution. So they are the 2 entities. Hutchinson is the same way. This happened a while ago, but they are the 2 entities. Neosho is the 5 entities. Paola is 3. If you have questions about that, you can ask your program manager, or you can always give us a call. But if you select the wrong one when you apply, I can't change it after the fact. I'll have to reject your application, and you'll have to do it again. So if that applies to you, I think the only other one that I haven't mentioned is Washburn. They're also the 2 entities. Just pay careful attention to that. So we're going to pick WSU, and then your access will be based on what you need to do. Most people are read access. If you have someone who's going to be a data entry person, they will need write access. So you'll choose that. The reason, you can say new staff, and then you'll click apply. That application will flow through to me, and then I try to approve those as they come in. An important note for new staff account applications is it's sort of a two-factor process. The first is the application from the individual who's requesting the account. It could also be done on behalf of that person by a program director or a data person. But it must be paired with, when I get the application, I pair it to a staff profile. So you won't be able to see this when you log in unless you are a super user like other KBOR staff. I don't currently have any, but what we can do is we can look at our test page. So this is really important for program directors or data staff who are helping account for new individuals. When you log in to AESIS, you have this main page here, the main menu. Under staff, you can add staff people. We'll go through that a little bit more. It's very similar to when you add a student. But the most important thing is that if you have a new staff member and you are requesting an account for them, you will need to make sure they have a staff profile here first. Otherwise, I won't make the account. We'll wait till that happens. So that's the new account process, kind of both sides of that for new staff, for existing staff to make sure that everything's in place for that to get approved. We're going to go back to that submission.kansas regions page, the main login, and just go over the forgot password and the reset password. We currently have a system in place so that if you forget your password or you lock yourself out of your account accidentally, you can request a password reset without interacting with someone. So if it happens in the evening, weekend, holiday, you should be able to restore access to your account, even if our office is closed. So if you've forgotten your password, you click Forgot Password. You'll type in your username, your last name, and then you will type in your email address, and you will click I'm not a robot, and then you will click Send Password Reset Token to my email. I'm not going to do that right now, but once you do that, within 1 to 5 minutes, you should get an automated email that has the token that you will need. The token is a string of numbers. Once you have that, you'll navigate back to the main login page and click this reset password with a token. We have had some issues in the past where that automated email will go to the junk mailbox. So just make sure that you're checking there to find that. You also need to make sure that you use the email address that you used when the account was created. We've had some institutions that have changed email address types. WSU Tech is a good one. They used to be WATC, watc.edu, and now they are wsutech.edu. That's something to think about when you're trying to request access, is if you've ever used a different email address, we might need to change that on our end, or if you have both in use, you might need to make sure that you're using the right one. So to reestablish access, you'll type in your user ID, you'll put in that token, and then you'll create your new password, click I'm not a robot again, reset password. So that functions a lot like a lot of different websites do now. If you have questions about it, the process is detailed in the AESIS manual, which I'll show you where that's located here in a minute. You can also give us a call anytime and we will help you through that. So for the AESIS manual, there are two places that you can get that. The first is through our main page again. So from the KBOR main page, if you hover over Academic Affairs, Adult Education Resources, the AESIS manual is here. You can click that and it will open up a PDF. And it has some definitions. It also has the steps to log in when password and ID are known. Creating a new user account is in here. So if you go through this and you have any questions, you can just give us a call and we will walk you through it. The other place to get the AESIS manual is from within AESIS itself. So we will log in. Again, this takes us to the AESIS main page, where we have a couple different options. If you can see it, you might look, I talked at the beginning about the link. So you can see this submission.kansasregents.org, then there's the -ABE. That indicates that I am in the AESIS collection. If I were to switch to another one, which you don't have access to, but for example, if I navigate to KEDS, which is our higher ed data system, you will see the KEDS link. So if you do bookmark a link, make sure that you take out this /ABE, /KEDS index or login and just bookmark the submission.kansasregents.org. That will prevent you from experiencing any errors in the future, or if someone shares a login link with you and they have access to a collection that you don't, it won't be confusing. So from the main page, there are a couple things here. There are the data collections up top. If you hover over those, these are all of the different data collections that KBOR has. Most of you will only be at AESIS and ABE. Some of you might also have access to KEDS, the higher ed data system, finance, things like that. Then there are other data links and information up at the top, most of which you won't use. There's also the log off, so if you're ready to log out, you can click that. It will take you back to that, to a main page. You get 3 tries before you get locked out. So again, AESIS ABE here tells us what collection we're in, name, and then here is the institution that you're in. Most of you will only have access to one institution. I'll go over that in a second, how you change institutions. Then this also tells us that we are in the first quarter of 2020. First quarter relates to the follow-up collection that we'll talk about in more detail later, and then 2020 is the current fiscal year. To change quarters or fiscal years or institutions, if you do have access to multiple ones, you click this change profile. So oftentimes I'll talk about your AESIS profile. What I'm referring to is your institution, what quarter you're in, and then what fiscal year. Depending on your institution and its history, you might have fiscal years 2003 to 2020. 2003 is when Pablo was introduced, that we recently rebranded to AESIS. So for this, you can look at historical performance and student data, or if you're in the current fiscal year, you'll be able to enter data or interact with reports from the current fiscal year. So right now we're going to select Test Institution 1, and we will select the second quarter of 2020. That's what we're currently in. And we're going to click Update. And you can see that that changed the names here. We're still in Test Institution 1, second quarter 2020. If you do have access to multiple institutions, you could select that here. For example, Washburn Institute of Technology, if you wanted to look at the old institution and the historical data from those students, or if you're a super user and you're switching institutions, you would click Update, and you can see where the institution name changed. We're still in that second quarter of 2020, but we could go back to change profile, and we could make a different selection if we wanted. So we're going to go back to that test institution. So we're going to run through these different sections. So we have this, I refer to this as the AESIS main page. We then have the main menu here where we have the student, staff, and other sections on this top block. Then down here we have forms and documents, help, and then the AESIS manual. So if you right click that AESIS manual, you'll be able to open it in a new tab or to save it so that you'll always have access to it from there. So on this top block here we have student, as you might expect. That refers to student information. You can search for students. You can add a student. You do not have local access to delete a student, but KBOR staff do. And then we have student reports, student list reports, and disaggregate reports. We'll go over reports in detail later. On the staff side, we have similar functions: search for staff, add a staff. You also cannot delete staff at the local level. If you need a staff or student deleted, you'd let us know. Form 7, reports, staff positions. And then on other, we have some miscellaneous items: student rollover, where you would roll a student profile over from one fiscal year to the next. Validate data is a suite of validation reports that you would need to pull quarterly for your data validation checklist, or on an ongoing basis just to engage with your data, find any issues you might have and fix those. Staff rollover, you do have to roll staff over from one fiscal year to the next. And then file exchange provides a secure place for us to exchange student data. Email is not secure. You should never email student personally identifiable information to us. If you need to ask questions about a specific student, you could either call or you could upload a file to the file exchange. One note with a file exchange is that there's no alert that you have uploaded a document. If you do upload something, you will also need to follow up with a call or an email to let us know. That way we can go and look at it and we can help you from there. Then we have the follow-up collection, which again we'll talk about a little bit later. So the first thing, I guess, is to ask if anyone on the call has any questions before we move on. Hearing none, we will move right along. Oh, or we do have a question.
Nope, no question.
Okay. So the first thing we'll go over is adding a student, creating a new student, and then go through adding tests, hours, outcomes. That's going to be the bulk of what we're going to cover today before we touch on some of the other AESIS aspects. Data entry is an important thing for our local programs. We don't know what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, and we can't report your performance to Octave. We can't data match to determine performance outcomes if it hasn't been entered in a timely manner and entered correctly. So one of the most important pieces of information that our students give us is their social security number. This is what we use as sort of our primary key throughout our data system, so having that is very important. But that is made difficult because we cannot require students to give us their social security number. So we want their social security number if they are comfortable giving it to us, because that allows us to data match for employment outcomes. It makes it easier to pull information for post-secondary. So if a student is comfortable giving it to you, collect it from them. Most of our programs have it on their demographics forms. If a student does not give you a social security number, there are procedures in place to give them a center assigned ID that, depending on your code, your FICE ID here will change. If you need to know what yours is, let me know. It is typically A. It always starts with A, so that we can easily identify them as center assigned. And then it is usually the last two numbers of your FICE ID. That is not always the case. So if you try to save a social security number using the center assigned format and it doesn't work, please let me know, and we will let you know what your format is. So the first three numbers are usually that A, and then the last two of your FICE ID. And then from there, it's really up to you to assign numbers and track. Oftentimes, centers will use, for the middle two digits, the fiscal year that the number was assigned. And then maybe a 0001, 0002 as they assign them to students. Something to remember is that until a student gives you a social security number, you should use their center assigned ID year after year. So if they're in your program, if, for example, this student entered your program in fiscal year 2020, but continued to fiscal year 2021, you would still want to use this same number that allows us to more easily track them across years, and we don't count them as two distinct students. So we'll do that. The program entry date, the best thing to do is the date maybe they filled out forms. If they're filling out forms in June for classes that start after July 1, you can use the first date of class. To us, there really is no set guideline for what the program entry date should be, as long as you are consistent. So for this, we're going to say that the date is 12/19/2019, should be today's date. We are going to enter student John Smith, no middle name, no suffix. You can select, if they do have a suffix, use from this pre-selected just junior, senior, second, third, or fourth. An important note about name is that if you have students who are going to be taking the GED exam, we do have an automated data match with GED where we match nightly for students who have tested, and we will automatically pull in their results. That match uses first name, last name, date of birth. It doesn't use the middle name. It doesn't use social security number. It is first name, last name, date of birth. So make sure that when you're entering a student, that they are using the same name as they use for their GED.com account. So if student John goes by Jonathan and that's what they want on their diploma, you'll need to change AESIS to reflect what's in their GED.com account. If they entered as John, but later you find out that they're using Jonathan, you can change it. That's not a problem. Just make sure that those names match. Also double check dates of birth. Oftentimes when someone says, hey, so-and-so's information isn't pulling over from gd.com, we find that it's either a difference in name or it is a transposed date of birth.
Chris?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
So if we have a student are there a certain number of characters as far as their names? I mean, is it unlimited, or what if a person has too many letters?
You won't run out.
Okay, thanks.
So after you enter the student's first name, last name, gender, date of birth, you'll need to tab over and it calculates an age on entry. And then for reporting race, you can select from this drop-down menu. With reporting race and with gender, go with what the student says. It's not really up to you to assign a gender or a race. If you don't know, you can make your best guess, but our demographics forms across the state have this information on them. The races and the genders are those that are given to us by Octave for reporting. So select those as best you can based on what the student tells you. So for address, enter the address, enter the city. For county, please make sure that you type out the county. Do not use the 2-character abbreviations. That's caused issues in the past. We've had individuals who have used the wrong 2-character. We don't really display this, but we have used it for some things in the past. So please make sure that you type out the correct county. Residence area, there are definitions for urban, rural, or other. If you click that, it takes you to the American Fact Finder where you can figure out what type of city you have. Also in the AESIS manual, it has population definitions to make sure that you are selecting the right type. And for zip code, please double check zip codes, especially in larger areas where you might have multiples. For native language, we have a pretty long list here. If for some reason someone's language isn't on there, let us know. We can add it. Again, we don't really use this for reporting to the feds. Some local programs have used this to report to boards or to speak to the diversity of language and ethnicities in their courses or in their programs. So if you need something added, let us know. Same with country of origin. We have some countries on here that maybe the U.S. doesn't recognize that country or that country no longer exists. Again, if you feel it necessary to add, we can do that. Phone number. We then have some information about incarcerated students. Please only indicate if a student is incarcerated if they are incarcerated in a state facility, one of the 7 male facilities or the female facility in Topeka. Give us their inmate ID number and their earliest possible release date. That really helps us for reporting. And we have to report on student recidivism, and it's much easier to look those students up if we have that information. An emergency contact could also be an alternative contact. Someone to contact in case the student's phone number no longer works or you get return mail from their address, someone that you can call. Um, if you need to follow up on a student, someone that you can call if there is an emergency at your center. But we can use it for both aspects. So means of recruitment, this is just something for your information. Flyer or poster, email address. So highest grade of education completed, anywhere from no school to a bachelor's degree. You'll then select whether that education was U.S. based or non-U.S. based. Please make sure that if you have students from other countries, especially if you are indicating that they have a bachelor's degree, that you indicate that it's non-U.S. based, so that we can properly account for them during our reporting. Employment status at entry, you would not go back and update this information if a student was unemployed when they started your program, but then get a job. You would not update that unless, we'll talk about periods of participation here in a few minutes, but unless they leave your program for over 90 days and come back, you would not change this information. This is simply employment status at entry. We use that to determine changes throughout the program or after they exit. Then list whether the student's a distance learner or no. We then have our barriers to employment. This should be part of every demographics form at all of our centers across the state. You would list whether or not a person fits into these different categories. The definitions are in our policy manual. For displaced homemaker, low income, most of our students would be low income based on the federal definition, which can vary based on family size, individual with a disability, ex-offender, homeless, youth who is in or is aged out of foster care, individual who's an English language learner, a migrant or seasonal farm worker, individual within 2 years of exhausting lifetime TANF eligibility, a single parent, a long-term unemployed individual, or if they're on public assistance. You have to answer each one of these prior to saving. If you don't and you try to save, you will get an error. Down here we have our other program types or other population types that students might fit into. Integrated English literacy, civics education. If your student's an AOK student, you would have to indicate this in order to access the AOK tab at the top that we will talk about here a little bit later. Which is here. STAR, student achievement in reading, if your student participates in that, indicate that. Integrating academics, those are the supplemental grants that we've released. Because We Care is a specific program at Kansas City, Kansas Community College in partnership with the University of Kansas Health System. Tyson Upward Academy for our programs that have partnered with Tyson at their plants. If a student's in community corrections, if they're in a workplace literacy program, if they're in an integrated education and training program, so an IET program that your program has built, if they're a refugee in a transition class, a veteran, if they are in innovations in IELCE, that is another supplemental grant we've done. AOK at Work, which is also our Walmart grant. Can Care GED, so if your student is on Can Care, or if they are the dependent of someone on Can Care, they can get their GED test paid for and maybe even materials fees for your program, but we ask that you flag that. if they're in a family literacy program, or if they are in an other type of institution, not a prison, but if they're in a mental health institution or a county jail, you would select that. Primary advisor is where, this is where your staff names will show up. So your instructors, you would assign a student a primary advisor if that's the main classroom they're in, or if that's who they sort of report and communicate with most. This test institution, the primary advisors are blank, so we're not seeing anyone. Referral source is kind of an open entry, but if someone was referred from Kansas Works, you can indicate that. Notes, any information you think we might need to know or you might need to track down the line, please include in notes. So did not provide an SSN, use center assigned ID. Sign general student release. So this would be a FERPA release that students sign. Click yes if they have. Sign GED release. So this is the fourth aspect of automatically pulling in GED scores. We talked earlier about the importance of first name, last name, and date of birth. The other piece is that they have signed a release that gives us the authority to data match their scores through GED testing service and display them to you in AESIS. So sometimes everything's right, the first name, last name, date of birth, and we'll find that this has been missed being entered because it's the last thing on the page. Once you have done that and you've double checked all your data, you would click save, and then you should get this message here that says your changes have been saved. You can then go back and make any changes. One note, I did save when we were partway through this screen. You have about 20 minutes of inactivity before the system will automatically log you off. And that inactivity counts as just being on the same page for that 20 minutes. So as I was talking through this, that was counting down to being automatically logged out. So if it's taking a while to work through some of this information, maybe save partway through once you've gotten all of the information entered that has the red asterisk. That's the required info. And of course, the barriers. So once you have a student's demographic information entered, you usually would then enter test scores. Now we have the TABE block here at the top. We have the ESL block here in the middle. Then we have citizenship. And then below at the bottom, we have definitions of TABE levels based on pretest scores. So these are the level scale score ranges for TABE 11 and 12 on the left side. And then for TABE Class E, the ESL tests on the right-hand side. For TABE 11 and 12, there is a section for an appraisal or for the diagnostic. You do not have to enter those, especially if you're using the online TABE 11 and 12. It doesn't actually display the locator information to you. You would only know their locator score if you're using paper pencil. So there's no reason to enter that, but we've kind of left it here just in case. For your TABE 11 and 12 tests, when you're entering these, reading, math, language, you can select the form through this drop down, whether they're on Form 11 or 12, and then levels A, D, E, L, or M. I know those aren't in the correct order from highest to lowest, but select the form that the student took based on their locator, and then you can select, or then you can enter their scale score in this pre-test block. Then you would enter your date. As you're putting these in, most of our dates in AESIS automatically put in the backslash. So when you're entering those, if you try to put in a backslash, it will put a second one in, and it will cause you problems as you're going down the line. So we're going to enter this student as an adult ed student using tab 11 and 12. Once you have entered the scores, if you want, you can put notes, but you would hit the save button. And what that's going to do is AESIS will run a process where it reads each line of the test that you have entered. And you can see on this pop-up box here, it says the first lowest level was TBE Write, which is the language test. It has been automatically chosen for entry-level classification. Please check if you have updated the reasons for overriding in the notes area. So that will then bring you down here to the suggested entry level, the entered level, which is a level 3. So if you look at language and this 517 here, and you look down here at this table, you would see that that falls into the NRS level 3 range. The other scores were 577 and 598, so that fell into the level 5. AESIS is programmed to place a student into the lowest entry level. We recommend that you stay with that. There is no reason to override. In the past, there might have been, but we're not even going to go into the reasons why you would have in the past because it doesn't matter anymore. Don't change this. It will only cause problems down the line. Regardless of what a student's entry level, they can record an ed gain through pre and post testing, regardless of what their entry level is. Entry level now only indicates where in our performance table when we report that student is reported. So they'll be reported on the level 3 line, regardless of if they achieved a test level gain in reading or math here. So we'll go over that a little bit more later. If you have questions about that, you can talk to your program director. You can look in the policy manual and get a little bit more information on that. For hours of attendance, every time you enter data, you'll need to enter the last date of attendance. This helps us automatically populate student exit dates. Class codes are up to your center. So if you want to say this is class AM1, you can. If you want to assign a number to each one of your classes, you can do that. The type of class code you use is entirely up to you. Then you can select staff that would be teaching that class, a class time of morning, afternoon, evening, or weekend. And then we ask you to enter time for us monthly. You would be tracking attendance on a daily basis, or if you were doing it in something like Burlington English or Aztec, you would be using clock hours. But we ask you to synthesize your information at the local level and give that to us monthly. So we will give 18 hours. The important milestone for this is 12 hours. 12 hours is when a learner becomes a participant and must then be counted in all of our performance measures. So we're going to say last date of attendance for this student was today. They've attended for 18 hours and 0 minutes. You click save. Down here at the bottom, let me zoom in. It gives you total hours. So if they were in class 1 for 18 hours, that's the total. If they were in class 2 for 22 hours, and again, you click save and scroll down to the bottom, it is updated to 40 hours. For the Outcomes tab, two of the outcomes will automatically populate. So if a student makes an educational gain pre and post test, this will be checked automatically based on processes that run in AESIS. There are other ways to achieve an MSG. The other is to receive the GED or a high school diploma. Currently, we only have the GED option. So if a student's GED scores are pulled in automatically, this box will be checked. You'll register a measurable skill gain. One that won't necessarily show up on here is if a student exits adult ed and enters into post-secondary education within the same fiscal year, unless you have indicated that here. We'll capture that through data match, but for FERPA reasons, we will not display that back to you. So if you have questions, you'll need to follow up with us. Students who are taking the CASA citizenship skills test, if they achieve that, you will need to manually check the box here. Or if they are in a family literacy program, you will need to you'll need to indicate if they've increased involvement in children's education or children's literacy activities. If a student has demonstrated college readiness, which we'll talk about here when we get to the college readiness tab, you would need to mark that manually. Local programs can no longer enter a student's exit date. Because of WIOA rules, a student must be absent from the program for 90 days before the exit date is entered. That is why under hours, the last date of attendance is so important, because our system runs a process every day where if 30 days have 90 days have transpired from this last date of attendance, this date will then be populated under the Outcomes tab as the exit date. The student will then be given an exit reason of auto exit, and once per quarter, as part of the data validation checklist process, programs will check students who have been auto exited and go back and select the reason, whether that be goals completed, which is positive, or whether they left for any number of reasons, or one of these other reasons, institutionalized, health, or medical, if a student's deceased, if they've been called to active duty from reserve forces, if they were in foster care and they moved homes, maybe they were ineligible for the program. If you find out that a student came to you with all level 6s but said they didn't have a high school diploma, and then you find out that they did, you could mark them as ineligible. If the student is incarcerated. So if they are currently out on their own in society and then are sentenced to prison and they go to prison, you would select this. Not if you are running a corrections education program and a student gets in trouble and moves facilities, or if they're put into segregation, you wouldn't choose this. Or then you can just leave it blank. If you have an incarcerated student who released, we ask you to put that in. That you can change. Any questions about tests, hours, or outcomes?
None.
Okay. Well, then we'll go on to the technology and pre-employment. We ask that you do North Star with all of your students. So North Star is a digital literacy assessment and skills tests. We have quality measures, which can be found in the policy manual that are based on North Star, based on a student's pre-test. If they get a certain score on the pre-test, the quality measure says if they score high on the pre-test, the quality measure says that they will complete one other module, which would be one of these here. If they score low on the pre-test, the quality measure says a certain percentage of those students will then score higher on the post-test. So not all of your students will have a post-test depending on what their original score is. So you would enter the pre-test, the date completed. If you have a pre-test for a student on the basic computer skills and then have a post-test, you can change this date to the date the most recent test was completed. Students can complete as many of these as they wish, but you will only get credit for one in the quality measure if they fit those criteria. Over the past several years, we have had the opportunity through a partnership with Perkins and with our workforce centers to have free Microsoft Office training and testing for students to earn their Microsoft Office specialist certifications. If you have students who are doing that, this is where you would indicate they've completed and the date they've completed. We also, for the National Career Readiness Certificate, which used to be known as the Work Ready Credential, students would take that test, and then based on the scores they get, you would enter that here. And then you can also select the level of certificate they get, record the certificate number, and the date they received that. There won't be an assessment history for this student, but assessment history would give you a list of tests a student has taken. For college readiness, we have a couple of different ways a student can meet that. The first here at the top is they met a post-secondary institution's non-developmental education requirements. So for ACT, Asset and Compass aren't really used anymore. Those will be going away. But if they took the older Accuplacer, or if they end up taking the Newton Accuplacer Next Gen, if they meet the requirements for not being in developmental education at your institution or any other institution that they might enroll, you could select evidence of college readiness. So if they got 23s on their ACT, you would select that and you would click Save. They must meet the college readiness measure in each area. They can't only do so in one, like with TABE. You can see college ready is greater than or equal to 617 on reading and 657 in math. This student did not achieve that. If they had only done so in reading, it wouldn't count. They would need to do it in reading and math. The GED scores here, and then the work key scores here. These will automatically populate. If a student meets these requirements down here. We don't do that for the MET post-secondary institutions non-developmental education requirements because those can vary by institution. But just remember that once this auto-populates college ready, you would need to go to outcomes and select demonstrated college readiness. And then click save. If your institution does Accelerating Opportunity Kansas and you selected on the student info page the AOK box to indicate that it's an AOK student, you will have access to the AOK tab where you would track some of the student's information, like their enrollment date in AOK, a pre-enrollment date if you did any sort of pre-enrollment, that the student is TANF eligible, if they had a previous occupation, this will populate. It doesn't populate for the test institution because it pulls from a list that is in KEDS, but you would have options here for the sector that your student might have been in. For the date exited, if once they leave AOK or they complete your AOK program, reason for exiting, occupation at program exit, employment status after exit. Under this section, you will have access to the pathways your institution is approved for. This is a test institution, so we don't have any, but you would select this program drop-down box, and then you would see a welding pathway, a healthcare pathway, computer support specialist. Select the pathway that the student's in. Then you would select, once you select the program, this sector focus of pathway will automatically filter down based on what the program is. So whether it's a manufacturing cluster, then for some information, is your student employed in the field? So if you have someone who's employed at a hospital who's in your healthcare pathway, maybe they're working on moving from an administrative position to a healthcare provider position, going through CNA, CMA, you'd select yes, or if they're already working at a manufacturing, but they're in training to go into a more advanced position, that's when you would select this employed in field yes. The credentials obtained will be based on the list from KEDS that is pulled into AESIS, and so that will depend on the program that you select. But just make sure the credential, if they have a technical skills attainment, and then the date, and you can add those here. So we'll do a more in-depth AOK webinar at a later date if anyone has questions about that. For GED, again, this information will populate automatically as long as you have the student's information entered correctly. If you have a student and you think their first name, last name, date of birth is correct, they have signed and you have indicated in AESIS that they signed the waiver so that we can display that information back to you, and they're still not populating, let me know. There are very limited circumstances where a student might not populate if they have multiple accounts. If that were to happen, I or any of the other KBOR staff could do a GED override where we can say that a student completed their GED and we can type that in for you. WIOA consent is a consent form that allows us to exchange information with our core WIOA partners like Kansas Works or Vocational Rehabilitation. This is a document that is the same at each of the core partners. So a student, you would have a paper version of this that a student would sign, granting consent to one or more of our partners. So you could say that. And you must put in the date and time. For each one. You can save that. If you can, you should authenticate this by, if a student has a driver's license, passport, or a state-issued ID. Once you have saved that information, you can always print the student's current form. So you can see that John Smith, the prior consent status here on the left is that they consented to everyone on 12/19 at 3:05 p.m. You could print this out and give it to the student. It also has the location of last update, BOR. If you look down here is the Kansas Board of Regents, Adult Education Centers, and Post-Secondary Educational Institutions. If they had updated this consent form somewhere else, Kansas Department of Corrections or Kansas Department of Commerce, it would change to that. But if a student says, I previously consented, but now I don't want you sharing my information with anyone, they can do that. You would go back in and you would click revoke consent. And you would update that. Just to note, if you do have a student, in the very unlikely event that you have a student who does decide to revoke their consent, this does not delete any information that was shared. This simply stops the sharing of future information. But they can consent 1 minute and revoke that consent a couple minutes later. And they could do that at an adult ed center, at Kansas Works, and we have a system that shares the consents across the agencies. Once you've entered all your information, you can see that on the student summary page. So you can see that this student, you can see their SSN, or in this case their center assigned ID, their name, class codes, current pre-tests and post-tests if they have any, their entry level, their highest level achieved. Here the highest level is 0. What that means is that the student has never taken a post-test. You can see the instructional time by quarter. So this student has a total of 40 hours and 0 minutes of attendance. Pop hours is something that we've included because a student rolling from one fiscal year to the next is sort of an arbitrary line. And Octay has told us that a student who was a participant in the previous fiscal year with unbroken attendance, if they, on June 30, if they have 45 hours, they attend class on July 1 for 5 minutes, that makes them a participant in the new fiscal year, and we have to count those hours. So that's what pop hours is for. So at the beginning of the fiscal year, oftentimes you'll get students who have 100 or 200 hours, and we're on the second day of the fiscal year. But that's because those hours do transfer and will bump them to participant status, even if they had 11 hours on June 30th and 1 hour on July 1. That student was not a participant in the previous fiscal year, but they would be in the current year. So we count those hours across fiscal years as long as they don't have a 90-day gap of attendance. Program entry date, last day of attendance. Here you can see that the GED was taken 12/19/2019, and you'd be able to go and check the student's information, see that they scored perfect. Then you can see in the outcomes that they have demonstrated college readiness. The received GED high school diploma is not checked. That process runs at 10:30 in the morning, so that would not be indicated until the next day because I did an override. Since the student does have enough hours, we should be able to go in. Enter post tests, and then you can see on the just so you know, if you had a student who scored 680 on each of their post tests, that would send up a red flag, but we're going to let it slide here. So for the summary now, you can see where the student has pre-test scores now, post-test scores. It would also be a red flag if you pre and post-tested the student on the same day. But you can also see under outcomes where that made educational gain is now check marked, and that did that automatically. So that is the basic data entry in a nutshell. Does anyone have any questions about anything we've done up to this point? Okay.
Oh yeah. So
Yes,
I'm trying to
Faye.
get in. Just one quick question. Am I in the? Do I have the right access now, or just the read access? Because I am trying to get in. Like earlier, I just don't want to bother too much, but I'm trying to get in, and all I'm seeing is the home page. I'm trying to hit the add students. So I'm asking, am I on the read only or write?
You are read only.
Okay, and that's good
So,
though.
do you want write?
No. Not now. Not
Okay.
now. The read is okay. It's just that I want to make sure how the data entry is looking at it, so that I also know what she's doing.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep, no problem. So that's adding a student. Adding a staff member is much the same. The first thing we're going to go over before I demonstrate that is staff positions. Um, this is something that we started a couple of years ago, and I think we're fine now, but it did cause some confusion at the time because we had these positions, position codes, and position type. So the position type is A and T, so that's administrator or a teacher. Position code is something that you come up with. I know for state positions, every position in the state has a number. Um, you don't necessarily have to have a unique position for every instructor. Um, if you had a generic pool of math instructors, that would be one. You could have that as one position. You could have one position of director. Um, there's a lot of flexibility here. The big thing for us is whether or not you are selecting that an individual is an administrator, a teacher, a counselor, or a paraprofessional. So position code here could be C12. And so this is what, when you create a new staff profile in AESIS, you will attach a position type to that. And that lets us know what type of duties that person does, which is something that we have to report to Octave. So if you do add someone, again, I'm not going to go through this in as much depth as we did the student data just for time's sake. Social Security number, you do not have to put your staff Social Security numbers here. That is something that we used to require because we need some sort of individual key for that person in the database. You can use SSN if you want. You don't have to. You can also use that center assigned format. Date hired. Date left. If someone leaves, you would go in here and indicate the date that they left the program, which would be their last day they were employed there. Primary code. So maybe this person is a part-time counselor, part-time math instructor. You can also enter full-time, volunteer. We're not going to enter, well, we'll enter me. Then you can also select duty code. So if someone's ABE, GED, ESL, life skills. And then some of these things here, this is something we're going to clean up probably over the next year. Some of these special projects no longer exist. Please enter the dates that they complete some of our trainings. So the PAM training, the date they complete this. New teacher orientation, if you do that. Change that to AESIS. But the NRS, NRS data quality, NRS data flow, whether or not they have certifications, adult ed certificate, K-12 certificate, special ed certificate, TESOL certificate, and then save that. The most important thing is that we have years of experience and the certification types, and that you are tracking when they participate in required trainings. And that their information is in there so that we can attach that to a new account request. Any questions about staff? So we'll touch just briefly on reports today. Like I said, student reports is where you'll spend most of your time. Our test institution doesn't have a lot of data, so we'll be limited on some of the things we can look at. But under student reports, we have quarterly instructional hours you can look at, participant status and category. We'll pull that and look at it. We have one student unemployed on entry. Non-US, highest degree completed, age, ethnicity, and gender. So basic demographic data for your students, program type and age. You can go through and pull any of these reports. You're not going to mess anything up. I would encourage you or your staff to go in and just start looking at reports, seeing what's there. We have a couple of reports. The one at the bottom that's probably most important is the G4. So if you're on the reports page, you scroll to the very bottom. Federal report by center, measurable skill gain by entry level. This report only updates once per day at 10:30. So we have one student enrolled. Because we have one student, we can see that we have 40 hours of attendance. But then we have in this column D number who achieved at least one educational functioning level gain. That's currently 0, even though if we go back to our student profile for John Smith, we can see the ed gain is accounted for here. It won't show up on this report until tomorrow at about 10:31 a.m. So back to the reports, you can read through students testing for high school diploma equivalency, participants obtaining, special programs that you can pull. You can also pull students by level. If you're looking at how the students are in your class. So this pulls is a live report, so we can see that that ed gain is accounted for here already. So I would recommend that you go through, pull reports, see what is there, see what's not, and kind of get a feel for your program's data. I'd also suggest you look at previous years, and that can give you a good idea. How are things looking this year compared to previous year? Do you have more or fewer students? How are your test scores looking? List reports are what they say they are. Usually they will give you a list of the students who meet certain criteria. A list of learners with data is kind of just a big data dump report. So you can see every learner that is entered into your system. First name, last name, phone, email address. And then you can see ed gain status. So John Smith, we see his ed gain completion, his entry level, highest level achieved will be updated the next day. Whether the person has finished the GED, exit date, total hours, if they have an inmate number, and then the earliest possible release date. So again, we're looking at 7 learners, but we only have 1 participant with 40 hours. The others have 0. That's why they're not showing up on the reports. Do you have any questions on this so far? So the last two things I'm going to go over today are the file exchange and the follow-up collection. Let me do one thing real quick. So as I said earlier, the file exchange is a place where we can securely share personally identifiable information on students. Uploading a file here, a couple things. One, it works a lot like attaching a file to an email used to work many years ago. The other thing is that any file you upload here, anyone at your institution will be able to see who has access to AESIS. So don't put anything on there that you want kept confidential from other people. If you have something that you just want to share with us, that's best done by phone or another method. We can talk about that if you need to. But the process for uploading a file, the first thing you do is click on File Exchange. It takes you to the File Exchange page. Click Choose File. So we are going to choose the John Snow GED not populating. Once you choose the file, you have to click Upload. It says Upload was successful. You can upload any type of Microsoft Office file and PDFs. Outside of that, you might not be able to upload it. But then it shows the file uploaded user, Chris S. Lemon, 2019-12-19, so that's today. And it was uploaded at 3:27 and 27 seconds. And then it gives you the file name, John Snow GED not populating. So if you uploaded that file to me, you would then send me an email or call me, and I could look at that, and then I could look into the issue a little bit more and get back to you. The other thing we're going to talk about briefly is the follow-up collection. So under WIOA, we must follow up on our students to see what their employment status is, if they've entered post-secondary education, if they've earned any credentials, what wages they might be making. We do data match as much of that information as possible, but if students haven't provided you with a Social Security number or they have moved to out of state, we would not capture that information. So it's very important that we do the follow-up, that we're doing it in a timely manner. In your programs, you should address follow-up with students as soon as possible, so they're expecting us to be calling them 6 months after they leave, a year after they leave, and asking them some personal questions about where they're working, how much they're making, so on. So to get to the follow-up collection, you first need to set your AESIS profile. So we're doing test institution first quarter of 2020. Go to follow-up collection. If you are the first one to look at this in your center, you will have to populate your follow-up. That will then display two buttons. One is the second quarter after exit download. The other is the fourth quarter after exit download. This is where talking about quarters can be a bit confusing. Our AESIS profile is currently first quarter of 2020. That tells the system our starting date, and what students from the past to pull up that we need to follow up on. Based on WIOA guidelines, we have to follow up on students 2 quarters after they leave and 4 quarters after they leave. So this second quarter and fourth quarter, these files have nothing to do with what quarter you're currently in, other than determining what students need to be on the list. So you will need to download both files, and the file that you download tells you what follow-up you're currently doing. So second quarter after exit, tells you who you're asking the second quarter after exit questions of. Fourth quarter after exit lets you know who you need to follow up on for the fourth quarter after exit, which would be a year after they leave. So because this is a test institution, we don't have very many students on here. So this is the second quarter after exit file. And we have one student, so we have John Snow, who exited on 11/17/2018. So we are asking the student about things that happened the second quarter after they left. So the date range we're asking them about is April 1st, 2019 to June 30 of 2019. And we would ask that student, are you employed? Y or N, who their employer is, how many hours they're working, and how much they're making per hour. On this file, we have the fourth quarter question, because there's only one question for fourth quarter after exit. That's, are you employed? Yes or no, Y or N. Then in either quarter, we would ask, have you enrolled in post-secondary education? What date did you enroll in post-secondary education? When you enter dates on this, you have to use the year, month, day format. So today is 2019-12-19. Have they earned a post-secondary credential? Credential ID, the date they earned the credential, the date they were surveyed, and then who they were surveyed by. For fourth quarter after exit, we did not have any students to follow up on. So you see how it says no records were found. So that means we don't have to upload anything. But normally you would have students in both your second quarter and your fourth quarter after exit files. You would then combine the two. So if, let's say there was a student here, you would copy that information and paste it in the other file, remove the headers. I'm going through this pretty quickly because we do have a webinar that goes into this more in depth. So I won't show the upload process here. Does anyone have any questions on this? Does anyone have any questions in general? I think that's all that we're at an hour and 42 minutes. Um, that is quite a bit. I know for some of you who've been doing this for a while, that's pretty basic. We do plan on doing some follow-up webinars where we will not cover the basic information. We will only cover reports, or we'll only cover follow-up. We'll do one on rolling students over, validating data, things like that. That way we can break this up into a sort of a multi-part series. That way we don't constantly deliver the same information. All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.